USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, January 2nd, 2023, where each week we look back at the highlights of the weekend and the news of the week. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th, 2023 at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Secure your seats at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. Well, we talked about the upcoming tournaments in our last episode. Those have all happened. We've had 3 tournament champions crowned. Let's start with the GLI. Schooley, you got to like this one. Number 18, Western Michigan rolling. Number 17, Michigan Tech dropped by the Broncos 8-1, and then Ferris State got rolled over 8-2.
Well, I mean, I predicted it. I predicted with my heart and ended up looking like I wouldn't even say a genius. I looked like I don't even like the Green Giant. They were unbelievable and scoring as many goals as they did. Obviously, they had the first games back. They had the eyes on the Great Lakes. I want to say, first of all, what good crowds they had in Grand Rapids. I watched the first game. I watched all the games, but the crowds they had, they were full. They were large. They were enthusiastic. The Michigan Tech Western game was sold out. Usually the afternoon game struggles. That was packed. And then you saw an unbelievable performance. Jason Poland, all the goals that he had, 6 of them on the weekend. I think he's got 5 hat tricks. I think he's announced his presence as a potential Hobie Baker finalist and even in the mix. And then you got Ryan McAllister, who's a freshman, to kind of take over. He's out of Brooks Bandits, put up a boatload of points. And I mean, you go down the list, Granger and Sasson. And then in net, they have a experienced goalie, and Cameron Rowe came from Wisconsin. They look to be humming. And I was really impressed with Ferris, too. I thought Ferris did a good job against Michigan State. And they kind of controlled the play for the first period in the championship game, but the dam just broke and they couldn't stop it. And it was every time you look away, there was a goal, and the same thing happened both games. And I don't think Ferris had an answer. I don't think Michigan Tech had an answer. And it'll be really interesting to see how Western moves forward after this. But a lot of great performances individually in that game series.
What a little run by Western. I mean, that's a really impressive 2 days. Maybe they're going to have Pat Ferschweiler go coach another team, every weekend for the rest of the year if they're going to put up 16 goals in the weekend. And you mentioned Jason Poland. I mean, that Mr. Hat-trick, 5 hat tricks. He only has 19 goals, but 15 of them come by way of hat-trick at this point in the season. That's quite impressive. The one team I want to touch on, though, is Michigan State. They finished 4th in this tournament, and they have now lost 5 out of 6 games. This was a red hot team in the Big Ten not too long ago. And now they've definitely cooled off. I know they finished with Michigan and Minnesota the last couple of weeks before the break, and then to come back and get 2 losses right out of the gate. That cannot feel good right now for the Spartans.
And I watched those games, and Michigan Tech kind of another one of those controlled the play. They just couldn't score. They got the late goal. They got a really nice overtime winner. And it was almost like the teams that were the Ferris and the Michigan Tech, they were playing the Michigan State of old. They were up for them. It was like the ghosts of Jason Woolley and Kip Miller, and they were playing for that. And, like I said, I thought Ferris was really good. I thought Tech played hard in that game against Michigan State, and now Michigan Tech's got the bonus of like 11 days in Arizona. I heard on the broadcast the day after the Great Lakes, they were going down to Arizona for the tournament, and they'll be down there for 11 days. Tough. That's their 3rd place consolation. They get to go to Arizona for 11 days.
I'd take it.
Speaking of Western Michigan, now's the time for them to take the momentum out of this into league play. everything else and the rest of their schedules in the NCHC. And right now they're sitting in 5th place at 4-5-1.
You're right, Ed. You need to carry this into the league. And if you can carry the goal scoring back to the NCHC, there's a good chance you can be dominant. But it was all combined. You had 16 goals scored. You only allowed 3 goals in 2 games. That's pretty good. Because if you're putting the puck in the net, that's one thing. But if you're also playing well on the back end, that becomes a little bit more unstoppable. They do have to right a ship within their league play, but that's a good start.
The thing that really is not concerning, but when you have something like that, winning the Great Lakes, or I go back to, our tournament, our Three Rivers Classic, you want to play again. And right now they're off. They're off until January 13th. They do not play this weekend. And to come back on break early from Christmas and then have a week off where there's nothing going on around New Year's and things like that, you want to play again. And we'll see how they come back out of break. That gets Pat Ferschweiler back. Obviously, Jason Herter and JJ Crew did a great job, but they want to play. And they're going to sit here till January 13th, 14th, and then they've got to go to Grand Forks, which will be a good challenge for them.
One team we talked about that was a little disappointing in the first half and needed to get something going was Clarkson. They take the Kwik-Trip holiday Faceoff with pretty decisive wins, 6-3 over UMass, 3-1 over Wisconsin. And that was also a come-from-behind win against UMass, down 3-0, and then just rolling from there. How about the Clarkson Golden Knights? What do we take out of this for them?
Well, I was kind of watching, scoreboard watching from afar. And, and you see them go down 3-0. It's like, well, hey, good for UMass. They came out of the break strong. Well, that was it. And they really tumbled after that. 4-goal third period for Clarkson to kind of finish off the comeback. They were down 3-2 after 2 and then end up with 4 in the third, a 6-3 win. And it was quick. Everything happened really quickly. They were popping goals in at a rapid pace, and that got them going. And then, they get Wisconsin the next day in the final and find a way to get the victory 3-1. I think that this was a Clarkson team that underperformed in the first half. And Casey Jones, I know he has high standards, and I'm sure that this was exactly what he wanted to see. Maybe not that first period, not falling behind 3-0 on day one, but they shook off the rust and boom, came right back. I'm very impressed with that performance.
And another holiday tournament that had a good crowd, 77,000 each day for the tournament, and it's good to see. You're used to some of those tournaments like we talked about before break, not having great crowds. And it was good to see 2 that popped out. You'll see the Arizona State tournament this coming weekend, but those popped right off the bat. So that was good to see. You could get really high after that win of a comeback win like Clarkson had, but then pretty workmanlike in their second win. They get up to a 2-1 lead. They hold on. They give up a goal late in the second, but then they just hold on and get an empty net goal with 3 seconds left. But like I said, pretty workmanlike. That's something that I think they really needed. They needed to go into this second half with something exciting happen. They're getting healthy. Some of their players some of their top guys were out, are coming back, and those are good things. And we always thought Clarkson would be one of those teams that could challenge up the upper echelon with Quinnipiac and Harvard. Now let's see if they can get on a little bit of run and do that.
This has got to be a really disappointing season so far for UMass, playing below where everybody expected them.
Interestingly, though, they're still kind of in that PairWise mix. The 2 wins they had against Denver way back at the beginning of the season are still carrying this UMass team. They've got to play really well in the second half, sure, if they want that at-large bid. But they have a lot more potential than they're showing. And I think that there's, sometimes things just have to happen to come together. They've always been a better second half team than a first half team. I look at the last couple of years, they made the run, got neither year as the top seed in Hockey East, and they've ended up winning the tournament in back-to-back years. And then, of course, the national tournament 2 years ago. They get hot in the second half. Let's see if that's the trend that will continue this year.
One other holiday tournament happened at Dartmouth, the Ledyard Bank Classic, and it was a great weekend for number 12 Providence. A big win, a shutout over Yale. Yale having a tough season, but a decisive 6-1 win over number 6 Merrimack for Providence to take that. We've kind of questioned Providence a little bit up and down, but boy, this is a great weekend for them.
Yeah, and I watched some of those games, at least the semifinals, and flipped on for the third place or the championship, which was first, and then the third place game on New Year's Eve. But Merrimack just, I don't know if it's coming out of break with a little bit of a happy hangover, but feeling good about themselves and having to dive right back into it. They struggled mightily with Dartmouth. They had to go to overtime with Dartmouth early. I thought, I think all of us had the consensus that it was going to be a Merrimack Providence final. We thought it was going to be easy. It was not easy. They came back and then they got it handed it to them in a 6-1. I don't know. Maybe is that a coming back, feeling good, having a quick couple practices. Some of the times that when you have travel into tournaments, it's really good camaraderie and you're playing for a championship, but sometimes it could be a little bit pressure too. And I remember going out to that Dartmouth tournament, and we had been playing pretty well and won the Three Rivers Classic and went out and did not play very well out there. And that's a tough place to get to. Maybe not so much for Merrimack and some of the Eastern teams, but it's sometimes just not easy to dive right back into playing. And there you go. And there's always a surprise at Christmas time of teams that don't do well. Talked about Michigan State already. Talked about this one. I don't know. Maybe we'll see how they do moving forward.
I was kind of surprised by that championship game final. I watched the third period and overtime of their game against Dartmouth, and it just kind of struggled at times. Moving the puck. There's something that you're right. There can be something about coming out of break. And this is a team that was red hot going in. I'm not going to say much. I'm not going to make too much judgment off one weekend. But if we see a trend,
yes,
that's when the comes in. But good for Providence. Nate Lehman got his team playing. They did not have any sort of a hangover from break. They came out really strong and a good, one goal allowed on the weekend. Fantastic, especially when you throw in a team like Merrimack that's been putting the puck in the back of the net and they score 9 and 6 against Merrimack. That impressed me. It definitely opened my eyes.
And one of the things that you got to remember is Jerry York used to always call it Christmas hockey. You forget you're off for 2 weeks. You come back, and in some cases, Western practiced on Christmas, and then they played on the 27th, I believe. And in some cases, you've got 2 practices, and you've got travel issues. Not the whole team might not get there. We had Air Force Canisius canceled because of weather. St. Lawrence had their flight canceled from Chicago and had to bus. And then they brought one of Omaha's players on their bus with them. There's a lot of things that go on. Equipment doesn't make it. So you're not having really great practices. And you're always worried. You're always counting the players in the locker room. You're waiting for phone calls of delays. There's a lot of distractions. And maybe chalk this up to a distraction. We don't know how their travel and all that was. So Jerry York said, like I said, called it Christmas hockey. Guys at World Juniors, you forget a little bit how to play.
Well, now that we've wrapped the tournaments, it was a great weekend for a couple of independent teams from Alaska. How about Alaska Anchorage? 2 wins over number 13 UMass Lowell, 4-2 and 3-2. We'll talk about the PairWise implications of those losses for Lowell in our next segment. But Jim, you got to see those games. What happened, and how good is Anchorage, and what happened with Lowell?
Well, I'll tell you that Anchorage is a better team than I think a lot of people wanted to give them credit for. I talked with Matt Shasby, their coach, kind of extensively, in pre-production calls, and then got caught up with them after the weekend sweep. And he acknowledged that there's some difficulties in their current schedule. They have a lot of open weeks, so they've been filling them with games against club teams like UNLV and some others that, they go down as exhibition games. But as he said, it's good. We get to learn how to win, but they're also learning bad habits, he said, in some of those games. And I think this weekend was just getting some of those bad habits, hitting the reset button for one thing. That break was probably good for them. And then, getting to, maybe work some of those bad habits out. They were very workmanlike. They got outshot Gross in the first game, 54-12, but 12 shots, 4 of them went in. Was not a stellar goaltending weekend for the Riverhawks. That was an issue, but I just looked at Alaska as a team that just never gave up. I'm sorry, Alaska Anchorage. I need to be qualifying here as I say that. Anchorage just didn't give up, and they got the lead on the second night and held on. And that was probably the most impressive thing for me, was they had not been in a close game since mid-October, where they had to hold on and figure out how to win down the stretch. And both nights they closed out games. One night 3-2, they get an empty netter. The second night 3-2, they didn't allow a goal. I was just really thoroughly impressed by this team. They will be a good team at some point. It's going to take some time. A lot of transfers. I think they have 16 transfers. They had 13 freshmen. They've got a good mix of freshmen through seniors and graduate students in the lineup, but it's still difficult. I look at what Matt Chasby did. I don't know if there's a lot of coaches out there that could have done what he did, which is build a program back from scratch. Schools, I know you're going to kind of go through this, or you're going through it. He didn't have a lot of time. He just, it started last October when he got hired in October 2021. And to think that 15 months later, he's going on the road and, sweeping a series against a nationally ranked opponent, that's pretty good. And they have 4 wins this year. One's against Western Michigan, 2 are against UMass Lowell, 1 against Northern Michigan. That's some pretty good opponents that they've beat.
Yeah, hats off to Matt and what he's doing. I've talked to him a couple times through the reinstatement process, and I've talked to him about games. I've talked to him about a few things, but hats off to him. I mean, if anybody knows what he went through, it's me, and it's not easy, and it's certainly not easy. I've got a better destination. Nothing against Alaska, but everybody looks down on it. Everybody looks down on it as far as games. I'm in a better situation of playing games. Pittsburgh compared to Anchorage. It's not hard to get to Pittsburgh. So hats off to him. And that's a big culture win for them. They can use that for a little bit. And, they're going to get into their independent parts of their schedule right now. They played Fairbanks 4 times, I think, already. I think they got them 2 more times. They're going to get the Arizona States of the world, the Long Islands. I think that you're going to see them playing like-minded teams a little bit when it comes to the independent circuit. And I think they got Lindenwood as well, but Lindenwood had a good win too against Vermont. So none of these teams are pushovers. They're all got everybody that talks about the parity of college hockey. And obviously we didn't have right now the Anchorage loss or victory over Western Michigan isn't hurting Western Michigan that bad yet. Maybe compared to their seedings, but they're in the tournament right now. So I'm watching with interest at what Matt's doing. And, I see Long Island on TV all the time. They're doing a good job. They're playing teams really hard. I mean, every game that you watch at Long Island, they seem to want to go to overtime. They come back, and they just did it at Northeastern. I mean, hats off to these teams, because it's not the easiest situation that they're being put into. And hopefully your next co-host next year will be saying nice things about me doing this.
I asked Matt Chasby this week in our production calls. I said, could you have done this without the transfer portal? And I know we've talked about the transfer portal many times with, good and bad things to say about it. He said, but his answer was no. He said, I can't imagine having a class of 26 or 28 freshmen in here, and then 4 years from now having to do it again. He said the transfer portal makes this where you can put some experience in a locker room, you get some leadership out of it, and most importantly, you get some balance in the class so that you don't have just a bunch of freshmen that become sophomores, that become juniors, that become seniors, and then you have to replace the whole darn thing. So I think that as much as I've maligned the transfer portal at times, talking about free agency and what it feels like, it has been good for these. It actually gives these independent teams like LIU and Lindenwood, St. Thomas, not independent, but these teams that are startups, it gives them a chance. It helps build a team a little bit easier.
I had 30 when we started in 2003, 25 freshmen and a couple of 4.24 transfers back then. Finley had dropped their program. So I had 30 and graduated 15. So it is challenging, and that big class is a big cycle. It will be different now.
Well, we did mention Fairbanks. They had a good weekend, a split with Notre Dame, 3-2 win on Saturday, 2-0 loss on Sunday. A good weekend there, too.
I just happened to be, I know we're going to get to the PairWise in the next segment, but just having to kind of look of independent teams, the top independent team in the PairWise right now is Alaska Fairbanks. And they're not that far out of the bubble. I mean, that's kind of one of those shocking discoveries that I made as I was kind of going through things last night, prepping for this show, was that you have a Fairbanks team that right now, if I look at it, I'm just going to pull it up and make sure I have it updated. They're 22 now. I think at one point this weekend, they were at 19. And that's not far out. And they're still not that far out. And with a record of 10, 8, and 2, they're in a position. They put a few of these late wins together as they get into that independent circuit, as you call it, in schools. I know that it's a big ask for them to get into the top 16, but if they put together a huge run where they win 14 straight here to finish the season, and a win against Notre Dame, something like that, that's going to help them. It'll boost up their PairWise and keep them in a good position.
And they're just going to have to keep winning. I mean, Arizona State, I think that I don't know if they've got enough left in their schedule to be able to make a run. They needed to probably beat Boston College twice at home. They do have their tournament. They do have RIT, and I think they do have somebody. There's a large, big name opponent in there before RIT, but somebody's going to have to make a run between Arizona State and Fairbanks when they go to all their independent games. And if somebody can go, 9-1, 10-0, and it might be Fairbanks, then watch out.
Well, we are going to talk about the PairWise coming up, some big impacts on that over the weekend. And we'll do that when we return. USCHO Weekend Review is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th, 2023 at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida.
All right, class, it's the NCAA Men's Frozen Four. Welcome to Fandom 101. Want to help your team rule the rink? Here's your assignment. Lesson 1, go big for every goal. 2, when you bring it, bring enough for the whole class. And 3, attendance is encouraged, but passion is mandatory. The NCAA Men's Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Buy your tickets today at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Class dismissed.
Welcome back to USCHO Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. Games this weekend had some impact on the PairWise. Let's start out with Penn State. They moved up just one spot, but fourth place is a great place to be in the PairWise. That comes off a sweep of RIT. For the Tigers, they were looking to see if they could be in that PairWise bubble. They dropped from around 18 to 23, and it's going to be a very steep climb for anybody in Atlantic hockey to get into the at-large position. But Penn State, maybe the biggest surprise team of this year, maybe second in that category next to Merrimack, but the Nittany Lions are really good.
I mean, typical Guy Godowski team, right? They move the puck. They get a lot of offense, still generating tons of shots, it seems, most nights. Maybe a little bit more selective with their shooting in some of the tapes I've watched. They're not just shooting from the popcorn stand, as I used to say. But I think they're generating tons of offense, and they seem to play a good puck possession game. It's difficult to get the puck from them, and then when you do, it does seem they even have a pretty good back end at times. So, I think that they are a big surprise. We kind of talked about them early when they went on that run, and they weren't playing anybody. Well, listen, they played some good teams now, and they've found ways to win games.
And Ed and I talked about this before the show. We were talking about RIT. One of the biggest things they have, and they do just funnel pucks to the net, is being aware backdoor, being aware around the net. And you most likely once a weekend, they're going to have a puck bounce off somebody's skate, somebody's stick, and go in the net, because they do want to get pucks around the cage. They do have a guy net front at all times, and that's just their MO. And I think what Ed said, it started on Friday or in game one. And next thing you know, they got a goal off of a defenseman's stick, and it just continues. And they score in bunches, and they score quick. And you always have to try to control, especially at their home rink, control the game a little bit and slow the game down. If they score, maybe change lines, take your time coming out. I mean, there's just so many different things that you have to do to try to slow them down, because they are an emotion-based team.
And you can be when you're playing in a building like Pagula, and it's packed, and you get that great atmosphere. So you score once, the building's going crazy. You want to get back out there, take that next draw, go down, score again, and you keep that energy in the building. They seem to do that really well.
Although strangely enough, on Saturday, not so much energy in the building, but a lot of students away. You get that student section full. It's really huge. But Penn State right now at number 4 in the PairWise in January, unless they lay a whole lot of eggs in Big Ten play, they are about 80% a lock for the tournament right now already, right, Jim?
Close, yeah. You can go on a losing streak, and you put together 6 losses, even 6 and 8, and that could be take you right down. They've got to play 500 or better hockey. Every team does. Maybe we can look at the top 2 in the PairWise and say, okay, yeah, fine, you're okay. You're not going to fall out, but it does seem that to get into a position that you are top 4 right now, you have to be a pretty good team, and pretty good teams don't usually lose 8 out of 10 or 6 out of 8.
Well, let's turn to Merrimack. They dropped from 3rd in the PairWise to 6th after winning in overtime over Dartmouth, but losing to Providence. I'm surprised still to see that much volatility this far along in the season in the PairWise, but a lot of it has to do with who you play and how you do against a team that may be a lot lower in the PairWise, because you absorb some of their maybe weaker strength of schedule.
I'm going to just ask a question. Is that because obviously they didn't get a full win over Dartmouth, and because of the ECAC? You guys know the PairWise so much better than me. I'm on the committee. I just was given the numbers and looked at them and massaged it. But obviously that's a product of the ECAC at that point.
That doesn't help them at all. Obviously, playing an opponent that's pretty weak and not getting your full complement of points, so they end up with 67% of. I guess
that's considered a home game.
Considered a road game home game for Dartmouth.
Home for Dartmouth.
It wasn't
yes.
that bad in terms of what they got in terms of winning that game. If they had lost it, that would have been a ton worse. But
you're right about Dartmouth, though. Right now, in the RPI, they've got the number 58 strengths of schedule. So Dartmouth rolled into your Merrimack strength of schedule is not going to help you out very much with that. How about BU? They move up to 7th with the overtime win over Harvard. I think people were overlooking Boston University at the beginning of the season, but Jay Pandolfo's squad is really showing that they belong in the mix.
They struggled a little bit out of the gate, but they're playing good hockey right now. And that was an electric building the other night. They went back to old Walter Brown. They had Disney on ice at Aganis and went into Walter Brown. It's probably the smart thing to do. You can open up the smaller building during break. The place was banged out, fans everywhere in that place. The game was on ESPN2. Great atmosphere, and then to get the overtime win, that place was rocking when Don Fensori scored in overtime. And boy, I know, Schools, you mentioned the kid from Western or a little earlier is the Hobie Watch. There's my Hobie Watch guy for this week. Fensori might not get the recognition, but he is probably the best two-way defenseman in the country right now. And man, can he score when he gets the opportunity.
Yeah, it was a neat game to watch. I was surprised when I turned it on. I was like, wait a second, that's BU. Wait there. Walter Brown had to get on to see if something was at Aganis. And obviously Disney on Ice. I texted Steve Metcalf. He was, how does it look? How does it look? I said, well, it looks good. It looks really crowded, looks enthusiastic. He said, okay, good. And then I asked him a question and didn't get a response. He left me unopened. So it's usually one-way conversations with him sometimes, but no, it looked like it was really good. It looked like an exciting game. Two big teams in a big event, and then to throw Harvard and Northeastern in on yesterday on Sunday too. A lot of good college hockey going on in Boston right now.
Now, Harvard is 9th in the PairWise, despite the loss to BU. They did get that big win, 8-4 over Northeastern. Let's bring Northeastern into the conversation. They're all the way down to number 44 after road losses to Bentley and to Harvard over the weekend. It had to be really a feel-good win for the Bentley Falcons, but Northeastern really struggling right now.
And you have an overtime win against Long Island that could have went the other way as well. Long Island had a chance, and then Northeastern comes down and scored. That's Jimmy will be able to speak more on that. I'm very interested in seeing his thoughts on. I mean, nobody would ever thought that they would be 44. That's probably the biggest surprise right now when you look at the pairwise. Would it not be?
Oh, no doubt in Hockey East, especially. But I look at their lineup and you look at their skating. At least three guys on the back end that you wouldn't even expect to be in the lineup. They're just so banged up on defense, and it's showing. And, you don't see Northeastern give up 8 goals too often. And no matter who you have in net, you can put, Ken Dryden in there. But if you don't have defense playing in front, it's tough. And right now they're so injured. I know injuries become an excuse at some point. Now they've just got to find ways to win, but they have dug themselves in such a pairwise hole that the only way for them to make an NCAA tournament right now is to win the Hockey East postseason tournament. I don't see another way to get back into the at-large picture coming from 44.
And what a great segue throwing Ken Dryden in there to Ed's next point, Cornell.
Well, Cornell has moved up to number 17. They are just outside the bubble right now in the pairwise. They had an 8-4 win on Friday, a 3-3 tie on Saturday, a pretty good comeback for AIC in that. But Cornell was off to a bit of a slow start, too.
Well, the impressive thing about that game was AIC took leads right out of the bat, both games 2-0. And for Cornell to come back quick on in game one. I always want to say Friday, Saturday, but I don't even know if they were Friday, Saturday. I've lost all track of days. But in game one, they came back and took a big lead, and AIC couldn't stop it. AIC takes a 3-1 lead right at the start of the third period. Then after taking a 3-1 lead, takes their first forced penalties of the game right in a row after they take a 3-1 lead. And Cornell capitalizes on the power play and gets 2 goals. I mean, is it coincidence that once AIC took a 3-1 lead, they got their first 4 penalties? I don't know. That's playing on the road and being the underdog in that scenario.
I'm still impressed with where Cornell has come, because they, at the beginning of the season, I had high expectations. They didn't get out of the gate strong, but they've had some good games, some good wins. And now they're right there. They're on the bubble. They're going to be, we've talked about, what leagues can get into the tournament. And this was a bad weekend for Hockey East in terms of the pairwise. And even they are now third in terms of the better out of conference winning percentage. They've dropped below 600, and the NCHC is above 600 now. So they've kind of swapped positions in terms of which conferences have the best out of conference winning percentage. All that said, ECAC is now putting themselves in a pretty good position to possibly get, 3 teams in. Cornell being one. Obviously, Quinnipiac and Harvard, they're in good positions. But you now have Cornell, and you're going to really look at Clarkson too. I think Clarkson is going to be in a position at some point, if they keep winning, to knock on the door. They're down all the way down at 36 right now, but you keep winning games, you never know where they could go. So I think the ECAC is probably the conference that came out of this weekend. A lot of non-conference players saying, "Hey, we're not in that bad shape."
And I'm remiss that I did not mention Cornell is up there with Harvard and Harvard and Quinnipiac earlier, because they've got that ability. They're right there. And, I said to Clarkson, want to try to get up with those two. Clarkson needs to get up with those three.
One more to talk about in the PairWise, and this was calamitous with the sweep over the weekend. UMass Lowell dropping for number 13, kind of on the bubble there, but sort of safe, unless there were a bunch of upsets. If you end the season 13th, you're going to get in as a 4 seed. But they got swept by Alaska Anchorage, dropping them all the way to 27th. Can the Riverhawks dig out of that hole, or are they going to have to win Hockey East to get in at this point?
They can dig out, without winning the Hockey East championship. But we've seen teams come from lower and find ways back. This weekend hurt them a lot. And the one thing it does is it takes all room for error out. There's no opportunity to have another weekend where it's kind of a brain fart and you get swept. But they've got ASC this week coming up, but couple of Maine, couple of New Hampshire. You got to win all 4 of those. Then you get a UMass, then you get Boston College. You have a couple against Providence later. You have a couple against Merrimack later. Those are the games that if you put wins in all those games, you're in great shape. You really are. But the room for error is gone. They cannot get swept again in a weekend. I was told by one of the guys that does a lot of the stats for UMass Lowell, that was the first time in the regular season that Norm Bazin has ever been swept in a weekend at home. That's 13 years he's the coach. They had never been swept in the last 13 years at home.
Wow, that's a very, very impressive stat, and that's a good stat. But wow, I mean, even just having like an off weekend or whatever, that just shows you the consistency of that program. And yes, that is very surprising that's a big drop at this time of year, is it not?
It is. You lose 2, you hope, maybe you go down 5, 6 spots. 14 spots was a big plunge.
Well, and part of that also now attached to the strength of schedule for UMass Lowell is going to be what is a fairly weak schedule for Alaska Anchorage, especially as they go into all the play against all the other independents. So, not much room for error, and you can't overlook the teams you should beat, even as you look at having to beat the other teams that you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know exactly how many games they have left. I'm not going to try to count it quick, but let's say that there's about 15 games left for them, maybe 17. They probably have to finish the season if it's 17 games, at worst 14-3 from here on out. That's not, you don't have a lot of room to make a mistake, and you definitely don't have room to, lay an egg on a weekend.
How big does it make this AIC game? I mean, one game against AIC on the road. I mean, that's a really big encounter, is it not?
You know that you can't lose. That's for certain, because you'd be taking another team with a relatively weak schedule, and putting it at a loss next to them. You can't do that. But it's one of those weekends where you almost wish, if you're Norm Bazin, that you were playing, Denver. You'd rather have your team getting fired up to try to go knock off the number 1 team in the country, rather than trying to go and beat an Atlantic hockey team that has been a powerhouse for years, but has been, let's face it, down a little bit this year. And I look at, Anchorage as an opponent. It was probably one of those weekends where they said, don't worry about it. We can kind of, sleepwalk through. Well, they sleptwalked through. Watching that, they were not doing the little things that they do really well. They weren't doing them this weekend. They can't afford to do that against AIC.
And it's their last non-conference game. They only got 15 left. I did the counting for you, Jimmy.
Well, we got one last quick hitter here that we'll wrap up with. Change in the rules allows some exhibition games against NCAA opponents. How do you guys feel about some of these exhibitions? They go down, hey, we got to win, even though it doesn't count. You're playing an NCAA team. Would it be better to add 2 more games to the schedule that you're allowed and not make them exhibitions? Is it better to do that than playing maybe a Canadian opponent?
I love it. I think that being able to play this extra exhibition, they're not going to add more games. They're not adding more games, but to be able to give this exhibition against a current team. I mean, they banged out, I think, 4,800 in Bemidji for the Gophers coming up, and that gets a chance to get those teams in your building. You get a chance to play at, you can play at a neutral site. You can do a lot of different things. You can be creative with it. You can do I know that some teams have just had basically used it as a power play penalty kill scrimmage at times. So there's a lot of things that you can do with it. I like it. I like the ability to play another NCAA team. I would do this over playing a Canadian school. You still can play a Canadian school. You still can play the U.S. development program. But the fact is that it's harder to get the Canadian schools to come down because the cost of travel is so much. And it's harder to play them because it does get dirty. It does get nasty. There's no ramifications. And at least in this scenario, you're playing another NCAA school that's on the same page as you. We did this after Christmas with a Canadian school, and I had to sit my leading scorer basically the whole game because 1, he was taking some hits, and 2, he was too involved in the game, and I didn't want to lose him for the next weekend. I love it.
I like it too, and I actually like the thought of the first game or 2 out of your break being an exhibition game because you mentioned it earlier in the show, Derek, the travel issues that were associated with this year returning to campus. I mean, I know that UMass, they were going to Milwaukee. They were supposed to leave out of Hartford on, say, Monday. Instead, they were on a bus to JFK on Tuesday and flying out of JFK to get to Milwaukee. I know talking with Matt Shasby, they were supposed to be on a plane on Monday heading to Lowell. Instead, they flew on Tuesday. They had players that never got there. They had players whose equipment never got there. It was kind of crazy for that. And when you could think of that you might have to go into your first couple of games out of the break. And we say it all the time, games in October mean as much as games in March. Well, games right after Christmas break mean as much as games in March when you're looking at the PairWise. Do you want to, lay a couple of eggs because you don't have your whole team or because you're not focused? It's much easier if you could just get one game back under your belt, even, as Bemidji and Minnesota did this weekend, where it doesn't count. And you know that you can play that game, and whether it's a great crowd or no crowd or doesn't matter, you got the skates, you got to hit somebody that had a different color sweater on, and you didn't have to worry about losing the game and maybe knocking yourself out of the NCAA tournament because of a bad weekend.
I want to just add one more thing before you close out the show, Ed. Big news over the break was Steve Hagwell retiring, and a very good friend of the show. And I just want to say he's been outstanding to me on all the committees that he's been on, and he's a really good person. I know he's a friend of your show on the Frozen Four, and but congratulations to him. A very illustrious career, and I texted him right off the bat. He was so gracious in getting back to me. But congratulations to Steve Hagwell, and did a really good job and a really good person for college hockey.
The interesting thing about Steve Hagwell retiring, also Bob DiGregorio retiring in Atlantic hockey after this season. Next season, the 2 commissioners with the most seniority among Division I leagues will be Steve Metcalf in Hockey East and Don Lucia in the CCHA, and they will both be entering their 3rd seasons. What a changing of the guard it has been in the last 4 or 5 seasons.
It has. Joe Bertagna was out, obviously. Josh Fenton moving out of hockey into an all-sport conference as commissioner. I mean, you look at some of these big changes now, Bobby D, Steve Hagwell, and I want to say that, give my thoughts on Hagwell, has been just a fantastic commissioner, done great things for that league. And he's been, as you said, Schools, he's been great for this show. He has given us so much time. And I remember when NIL was coming along, he gave me some background and advice on that. When transfer portal came out, he was the first guy I went to, because some people are just really in touch with the NCAA in understanding kind of the pace and the agenda and stuff like that at the national level. And Steve Hagwell was always in touch with that. So good guy. I wish him the best. We'll miss him in college hockey, but I'm sure, just like Joe Britannia, he seems to be around every now and again. I think we're still going to see Steve Hagwell in some good situations and good places in years to come.
Yeah, he's in Florida. He already told me that he was going to be in Florida, so we'll see him down there.
Steve Hagwell and I always have joked about both of us not liking the designated hitter when we talk about rule changes and stuff. And it seems to me that Steve Hagwell has been maybe a moderating influence when things have looked at trying to change things. And he said, okay, let's take a slower pace at that and let's look at it. He's said very frankly to us, he doesn't like the shootout in the 3-on-3, but has gone along with it. Has he been kind of a moderating or kind of a level-headed force in things? You've worked with him, Derek, with the committee and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with him with the rules committee. I worked with him with the championships committee. Very well thought of as a person, but very well spoken. He doesn't speak to speak, and he's not this crazy rule change. He likes the tradition of the game, and he's very thoughtful when he does things, and never got the hey, let's put a chair up over the blue lines like a tennis match and get the referees off the ice. It was always traditionalist and always very thought provoking when he spoke, and a really good person. So, I can't say it enough. And college hockey's going to miss him. I'm sure, like you said, we'll see him around, but that's a loss. I don't know how the people in the ECAC feel, but from the outside looking in, that's a big loss.
Well, let's wrap it there for this edition of USCHO Weekend Review. We've been sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th, 2023 at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Secure your seats at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Find our podcasts at uscho.com/podcast or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. For Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Weekend Review.